I'd like to thank each and every one of you for making it to this presentation. This presentation is about the social implications of climate change. Anything that you guys want to add to that?
So let's introduce ourselves first.
Yeah.
So we're Team Nature Nerds for PGC. My name is Jennifer.
My name is Richard Wren.
I'm Joanne.
I'm Alice.
So essentially, let's start with an introduction. Let's start with an introduction to what climate change is, right? All of you have heard of climate change. It's, the changing of the climate. Hence the term climate change. There's a lot of reasons why climate change right now matters more than it has ever. According to the United Nations, we basically have until like 2030 to change climate change. And I'm pretty sure the Stern Review, which quantifies the economic impacts of climate change, said things like climate change will cause things like flooding, right? Climate change will cause things like droughts. They can cause weather extremes, which can lead to serious implications. They can cause a flooding of like major coastal cities, and so there's a lot of reasons why we should care about this issue more than ever. However, we're not here to discuss the economic implications of climate change, more or less. We're here to discuss how climate change is a social injustice, how we as wealthier nations have caused this problem, and how it hurts nations that are really struggling and need the help right now. So essentially, this essentially says what I've said so far. However, where is the social justice in climate change? How is climate change a social issue? Well, all the poorest countries, right, they have caused climate change least, right? They're least responsible for climate change, and yet they're the ones who are going to be the most affected by it. They're the ones who are going to be the most hurt by it. They're probably going to be the ones who have the most conflict because of water scarcity, and they're probably going to be the ones that are going to have to flee somewhere else because they cannot sustain like agriculture and food and water and current resources needed to survive in their current climates.
So if you look at right now, as of 2011, the United States and the European Union contribute to like 52% of the world's CO2 emissions. So that's a huge amount, and China is at third with at 11%. So we can see right here that 3 countries are causing a majority of the world's carbon emissions. And that's a major problem because right now, as Americans right now, we don't really see the full impact and scale of climate change, even though we're the ones contributing to a lot of it. And right now we can see that rising temperatures, and a lot of this we've seen from a lot of hurricanes impacting places like Haiti and a lot of other areas around the world. Like they're suffering from climate change, all this flooding, but we're not seeing these results here as well. So as I've said before, climate change has a lot of devastating effects, and people have lost lives from this. So it's just going to say that the social injustice is that we're the ones, or a lot of industrial countries are the ones that are causing a lot of this problem, but it's countries that are innocent that are the ones who are experiencing the full impacts of it.
So an example of this is Bhutan. Bhutan is a country in Asia, and it is actually carbon negative. It is not producing, it is producing carbon, but then they have a lot of forests, and those forests actually get rid of much of the carbon dioxide. And as you can see over here, they export a lot of their renewable electricity, and that can offset like 50 million tons of CO2, which is more than what New York City produces. But the thing is, even though they're like a carbon sink, they're actually getting the full impact of climate change. And in these pictures, you can see how pretty Bhutan is, all the forests, but then all these floods are wreaking havoc on their towns.
Okay, so here's more about why climate change is actually a social justice issue, as Richard was talking about earlier. So we see how the effects of climate change, such as extreme high air temperature, raised levels of ozone, pollutants, and etc., things like that. It really affects a certain generation, which is elderly people. And even though elderly people are not the primary generation that is causing climate change, they're the ones that are being affected by it disproportionately, as you can see with countries like Bhutan, where countries like US and China are producing more pollution to increase climate change. Countries like Bhutan are not producing anything for climate change, however, they're still receiving the negative effects of it. So that's something that we really need to change.
So there's a lot of things we can do to fight against climate change, as we talked about before. So okay? That's fine.
I also wanted to mention something else.
Yeah, go ahead.
In Shanghai, especially Beijing and Shanghai, how many of you guys been to Beijing or Shanghai or any major Chinese city?
Born there.
You're born there. Yeah. As you know, there's probably a lot of pollution and a lot of deadly particles in Shanghai, right? They probably mess up your lungs a lot, right? But then, if you look at the pollution in China, and you look at the pollution caused by China, and you look at the pollution caused by the United States and the European Union and all of these developed countries, and afterwards, you think about it this way, is that the United States and China and the European Union, they have the resources to deal with the devastating effects of climate change, right? They have the resources to build walls that would protect their cities, right, from flooding. They would have the resources to actually, still keep on farming, right? Poorer countries, especially those in Africa and the Middle East, I mean, right now I believe Cape Town is or was facing a water shortage, right? Like, they don't have the resources to deal with these sort of things, and so that's something else that I just wanted to mention.
Yeah, it's only worsening the impact on them because they're already in locations that make them vulnerable to climate change, and then they don't have the resources to deal with it, which just exacerbates the problem. So right now here we have a slide on water. So we know water is essential to a lot of the activities we have, but right now half the world's population lives within 60 kilometers of the sea. But by 2025, 40% of the world's population is going to be living in countries experiencing water shortages. And that's going to be an extreme problem here. So now we need to talk about what we can do to fight against climate change.
Actually, for now, if any of you guys have any ideas on how you guys could fight against climate change, participation is strongly
Yeah.
encouraged.
Okay, so.
And if you participate, you'll be my new favorite person.
Right. Yes.
Wait, I didn't think of anything yet.
So.
Guys, how can we prevent climate change? Think
No,
about
we'll give some
carbon.
ideas.
Yeah, so our first part is using renewables. So do you guys have any ideas what renewables are or what they could be? Renewables, like bags, plastic bags?
This one.
Yeah, this one. Yes,
Yeah,
Melanie.
Reusable water bottles.
Yeah.
Reusable water.
Reusable water
Oh.
bottles.
So instead of having plastic bottles like this one, sorry Lana, by the way. Instead of having plastic water bottles like this one, if you instead use reusable water bottles, you would waste a lot less plastic, right? And plastic contributes to a range of environmental issues, but it does contribute to climate change, which is a serious environmental
But
issue.
a lot of people buy 5 and they never use them. So doesn't I don't know.
That's why you should invest
I'm not
in a
sure,
good one.
but
Yeah.
on my
That's why Richard
chemical
is
homework.
obsessed with clean cans.
Oh yeah, there was a thing. It was like
Yeah.
making glass bottles is actually contributes more carbon. So if everyone just bought one and used it, then it would be. But they don't. So
Yeah.
I
Glass
got them
bottles.
from my chem homework. I don't actually know if it's
Not reliable.
Thanks for the contribution, Cece.
No, but it is a big point though, because if they talk about how if you're using laptops, for example, how you're not wasting paper, but then there's a lot of
Yeah.
resources that are used when you make laptops. So it just goes to show
For
are we
everything
really?
else.
Yeah.
You have to take the energy to power an iPad, for example, for the paperless initiative versus the energy for paper and the energy that is lost from cutting it down a tree. The carbon dioxide that's lost from that. But yeah, you have to weigh the positive and negative effects of everything.
Or even the replacement of paper straws with plastic straws with paper straws. Are paper straws actually more environmentally friendly? Although some companies may claim that certain things are more environmentally friendly, I think it's very important to research that.
So our whole point right now is use renewables and use them well. Use them for their purpose. Don't buy 20 renewables but never use them. So make sure that they're used for what they're meant for.
Exactly.
Do you guys believe that climate change is only a social justice issue?
No.
So this is we're just putting another spin on the topic because it is a really big there's a lot of points.
Because in many of the poor countries that you guys are speaking
Mhm.
about, people want to move to the industrialized countries that you're
Yeah.
speaking about to
Mhm.
work in the same industries that are going to affect the countries that they came from, right?
Yeah.
So how do you how do you see in the future, how do you see that this problem is going to be combated?
I mean,
Something.
a lot.
Yeah.
I know.
Something that I was thinking that was actually something that I was thinking about, right? Which is that you want these developing countries to become industrialized, right? But then every single country that's become industrialized so far has done it at great expense to the environment, right? And so what I'm thinking is that if richer countries can fund the development of things like greener technology, right? Like for every single solar panel that we build, it becomes cheaper to build a solar panel. And so if we can make it cheap enough that it's cheaper than resources like coal and oil, then of course we would be able to, like, from an economic standpoint, we would be able to make it so that way developing countries would be able to develop their economies and develop their energy resources through things like renewable energy, which is a lot better for the environment.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that developing countries, one, have an obligation to provide foreign aid to developing countries. Developed countries have an obligation to provide aid to developing countries, and two, they also have an obligation to trailblaze that greener nation thing, such as like France with food waste. They donate all their food waste to like homeless shelters and like people who actually need it, instead of allowing all their food waste to just straight go to the landfill. And that's actually a huge problem in the United States, where like food waste is causing methane to go into the atmosphere and cause global warming. So I think that if we make some of those changes, then that's a great thing.
So moving on to the next point, greening your commute. So basically, you guys have any ideas about what that is? Greening your commute?
Has anyone here heard of electric cars?
Yes.
Yeah.
They're definitely becoming
Yes.
green.
Yeah, right?
They're definitely becoming, especially companies like Tesla. They built like pretty amazing stuff into their battery technology. Anyone like to add on to that? On like greening your commute, how the future.
Biking.
Yes, walking. Anyone heard of walking?
What?
Alice? Or carpooling.
Yes. They're all good options.
Consume less, waste less. You know, enough said, right? We waste
Yeah.
a ton of things, right?
I mean, we have like a bunch of lights right now in this room. Do we really need all of them for this presentation?
No.
Maybe.
Confident.
You just need a candle.
So,
Um,
one candle in the center.
invest in renewables, say no to fossil fuels. Both kind of, you know, both sides of the same coin that we went over before. Then afterwards we have eat a climate stable plant, right? So a lot of times you have animals, which, by the way, they use way more resources than plants would for equivalent protein, for equivalent, you know, nutrition. Yeah. Yeah.
Then there's a lot of like the industrial thing about processing a lot of these plants, and there's a lot of fertilizer, artificial fertilizer, that can damage a lot of our resources like water and soil. Which are problems. So, we covered in school.
Right.
So,
Anyone have any ideas for how our school, since you know you have to start small until
We should get recycling.
We do have to,
do.
yeah, like
You
We do
should
have-
make people aware of the recycling.
We have recycling. I thought we didn't have for paper though.
We don't
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah.
Actually, that's funny
Jericho
because I
doesn't.
set up a paper recycling bin in the middle school, but then they got rid of it because I had to take it home every single day, and that was kind of annoying. But like, yeah, our school should set up like someone to come pick up the paper. That's a really good idea.
As you can see, we came up with a few ideas ourselves for how. I mean, if you guys want to comment on any one of these, feel free. Can you guys see back there? Just one. Okay.
So, reduce, reuse, recycle. Maybe turning, like, I think a lot of classrooms already turn off their lights when we do, like, during lessons and stuff, so that's good.
We do have a, I believe, computerized control system for our lights. And
Yeah,
so it
I think they're-
automatically turns
Yeah, I think they're
stuff
starting to implement, like, this motion sensor things, so when you walk into a room, they'll automatically turn on and turn off when you leave the room. So that's gonna be really nice for energy saving.
That's it. So thank you guys
Thank
for
you
watching.
so much
and
for
we'll see
watching.
you.
Yeah. Alright then,
Thanks so
thank
much.
you.
Oh my god.
Good job.
Thank you.
Please don't-
Yeah, thank you.